The night was cold, and raindrops drummed steadily against the windshield of Officer Daniel Harper's patrol car. The streets were unusually quiet, with only the occasional hum of a distant vehicle breaking the monotony. Daniel had been on duty for 6 hours already, but he wasn't tired. He liked these late-night shifts. They gave him time to think, to reflect on things that mattered most to him: his family, his job, and the people he'd sworn to protect. As he drove down a dimly lit suburban road, his eyes caught movement ahead. A yellow taxi sped by, swerving slightly as it rounded a corner. Something about its erratic path didn't sit right with Daniel. Maybe the driver was distracted or worse, under the influence. Either way, it was his responsibility to check. Flipping on his flashing lights, he signaled the taxi to pull over. The taxi slowed and came to a stop near the curb. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of his car, squinting against the drizzle. His boots splashed through puddles as he approached the vehicle, his hand resting instinctively on the holster of his gun. These moments always carried an edge of unpredictability, no matter how routine they seemed. You never knew what you'd find behind closed doors or windows. Reaching the driver's side, Daniel tapped lightly on the glass with his flashlight. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and wide, nervous eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked, his voice shaky. "I noticed you were driving a bit erratically back there," Daniel replied calmly, shining his flashlight into the front seat. "Everything okay?" The driver nodded quickly, fumbling for words. Yeah, I'm fine, just tired, I guess, long shift." Daniel nodded, satisfied, for now. But then something unusual drew his attention. Through the rear-view mirror, he caught a glimpse of the back seat. At first, all he could see was a shadowy figure sitting motionless. It wasn't uncommon for taxis to carry passengers, but there was something unsettling about this one. The person hadn't moved since the car stopped. Not even a twitch. Curiosity tugged at him. Keeping his tone casual, Daniel leaned closer to the open window and angled his flashlight toward the back seat. What he saw made his stomach drop. Sitting there, partially hidden by the darkness, was a young woman with pale skin and long, dark hair draped over her face. She looked fragile, almost ghostly. Her stillness was unnatural, like she wasn't entirely present in the moment. For a split second, Daniel felt his breath hitch. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place. He tried to shake off the feeling, reminding himself that he was being irrational. This was just another traffic stop, nothing more. Yet deep down, he couldn't ignore the creeping sense of unease. Who was this girl? And why did seeing her feel like staring into a memory he'd buried long ago? With his heart pounding faintly, Daniel straightened up and took a step back. He needed answers, but he also knew better than to jump to conclusions. Whatever this situation was, it was far from ordinary, and it was only beginning. Daniel stood, frozen for a moment, his mind racing faster than the raindrops falling around him. The image of the girl in the back seat lingered in his thoughts, refusing to fade. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to the flashing lights or the sound of his voice. It was as if she existed in a world of her own, detached from everything happening outside the taxi. He shook his head slightly, trying to focus. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered something strange during a routine stop. Over the years, he'd seen plenty of unusual situations: nervous passengers, people hiding things, even drivers who tried to run at the sight of his uniform. But this felt different. There was an eerie quality to the scene that he couldn't quite explain. As he replayed the brief glimpse of the girl in his mind, fragments of memories began to surface. He remembered a case from years ago, one that had haunted him long after it went cold. Emily Carter, a 14-year-old girl who had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance had shaken the community, leaving behind unanswered questions and broken hearts. Daniel had been part of the investigation, pouring countless hours into searching for clues, interviewing witnesses, and following leads. But no matter how hard they tried, Emily remained missing, her face staring out from posters that eventually faded in shop windows. Could it be her? The thought sent a chill down his spine. The resemblance was uncanny. The pale skin, the dark hair, the fragile frame. But logic told him it couldn't be. Years had passed since Emily's disappearance. If she were alive, wouldn't someone have found her by now? And yet there was something about the girl in the taxi that tugged at his instincts, whispering that this wasn't just another coincidence. Daniel forced himself to take a deep breath, reminding himself not to jump to conclusions. He needed to stay calm, professional. Whatever was going on here, he would handle it step by step. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that fate had placed him in this exact spot for a reason. Was this a second chance to solve a mystery that had eluded him for so long? His eyes flicked back to the taxi. The driver was still talking, his voice jittery as he explained how tired he was, how he didn't mean to speed. Daniel barely heard him. His attention was fixed on the rear window, where the silhouette of the girl remained motionless. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if he was imagining things. Maybe the stress of the job was getting to him, playing tricks on his mind. Or maybe, just maybe, this was real. The rain continued to patter against the pavement, amplifying the silence between them. Daniel tightened his grip on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. He knew what he had to do next. Stepping closer to the car, he leaned down slightly, angling his light toward the back seat once more. This time, he focused not just on the figure but on the details, the curve of her cheek, the way her hands rested limply in her lap, the faint rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. And then, almost imperceptibly, she moved. Her head tilted upward ever so slightly, revealing more of her face. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Though her features were partially obscured by shadows, there was no mistaking the hollow look in her eyes. They weren't filled with fear or confusion. They were empty, as though she were staring into nothingness. A knot formed in Daniel's stomach. Whoever this girl was, she wasn't okay. Something was terribly wrong. Whether she was Emily Carter or someone else entirely. One thing was certain: she needed help, and Daniel wasn't about to walk away until he knew exactly what was going on. Daniel's pulse quickened as he leaned closer to the taxi, his flashlight beam steadying on the back seat. The girl's face was still partially hidden, but now that she had tilted her head slightly, he could make out more of her features. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her dark eyes seemed to stare straight through him, devoid of emotion. It was as though she wasn't fully present, like a shadow of someone who once was. The driver, sensing Daniel's unease, stammered, nervously, "Officer, is something wrong? Is there a problem with the passenger?" His voice cracked under the weight of uncertainty. "No," Daniel replied sharply, though his tone betrayed his growing tension. "Just stay calm and answer my questions." He turned his attention back to the girl, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you tell me your name?" For a moment, there was no response. The only sounds were the rhythmic patter of rain against the car roof and the faint hum of distant traffic. Then slowly the girl raised her hand. It trembled slightly as it moved, almost as if the effort required every ounce of strength she had. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, her lips parted just enough for a soft whisper to escape. "Help. Me." The words were barely audible, carried away by the wind before they could fully register. But Daniel heard them loud and clear. They sent a jolt through him, igniting a mix of concern and alarm. There was desperation in her voice, a plea that felt raw and genuine. Yet, at the same time, there was something unsettling about how fragile she appeared, how detached from reality she seemed. "Help you with what?" Daniel pressed gently, leaning closer to the window. "Are you hurt? Did someone do this to you?" The girl didn't respond. Instead, her gaze shifted downward, avoiding his eyes. Her hands returned to her lap, trembling ever so slightly. Whatever was weighing on her, it was clear she wasn't ready or able to talk about it. Daniel glanced at the driver, whose knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Did you notice anything unusual when you picked her up?" he asked, keeping his tone firm but calm. The driver shook his head quickly. "No, sir, I swear I didn't see anything weird. She flagged me down near an old gas station on Route 12. Didn't say much during the ride, just gave me an address, that's all I know. Route 12. The mention of the location struck a chord in Daniel's memory. It was a desolate stretch of road surrounded by dense woods and abandoned buildings, the kind of place where people rarely ventured after dark. Something about it felt off, especially given the circumstances. Why would someone be standing there alone in the middle of the night? Turning his focus back to the girl, Daniel tried again. Miss, can you tell me where you're headed, or who you're meeting? This time she didn't respond at all. Her silence was deafening, filling the space between them with unanswered questions. Daniel studied her carefully, noting the way her thin frame seemed to sink into the seat, as if she were trying to disappear. Every instinct told him that something was terribly wrong, that this wasn't just a random encounter. Rain continued to fall around them, creating a cocoon of sound that isolated the trio from the rest of the world. Daniel knew he couldn't leave her here, not like this. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, she needed protection. And if she really was connected to Emily Carter, then this case wasn't over after all. With resolve hardening in his chest, Daniel stepped back from the car and signaled for the driver to roll up the window. Stay put, he instructed firmly. I'll be right back. As he walked toward his patrol car, his mind raced with possibilities. One thing was certain, tonight wasn't going to end quietly. Daniel returned to his patrol car, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts as he grabbed the radio. He needed backup, but more importantly, he needed answers. Something about this girl didn't add up. Her fragile demeanor, her cryptic plea for help, and the unsettling coincidence of where she had been found. Every fiber of his being told him this wasn't an ordinary situation. As he called it in, requesting additional officers and a welfare check on the passenger, Daniel kept one eye on the taxi. The driver was still sitting nervously behind the bay wheel, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror. The girl hadn't moved an inch. She remained slumped in the back seat, her face partially obscured by shadows, her hands resting limply in her lap. It was as if she were trapped in some invisible force, unable to break free. Minutes later, another patrol car arrived, its red and blue lights casting eerie reflections on the wet pavement. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions shifting, from curiosity to concern as Daniel quickly briefed them. We've got a potential missing person here, he explained, gesturing toward the taxi. The passenger isn't talking much, but there's something off about her. The officers nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Together, they approached the vehicle again. One of them spoke to the driver while the other opened the rear door cautiously. Miss, the officer said gently, shining a flashlight into the back seat. Can you step out of the car, please? The girl hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to move. Her movements were stiff, almost mechanical, as though each motion required tremendous effort. When she finally emerged from the taxi, Daniel got a better look at her. She was even smaller than he'd imagined, her clothes damp and slightly disheveled. Her eyes darted around aimlessly, avoiding direct contact with anyone. Do you know where you are? Daniel asked softly, taking a step closer. Can you tell us your name? She blinked once, twice, but no words came. Instead, she wrapped her arms tightly around herself, shivering despite the mild temperature. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist that clung to everything like a ghostly veil. Frustration bubbled beneath Daniel's calm exterior. Whoever this girl was, she clearly wasn't in any state to explain herself. He turned to the driver. You said she flagged. You down near an old gas station? Did she say anything when she got in? The driver shook his head. Just gave me an address, that's all. I thought maybe she lived nearby or was meeting someone. And you didn't think anything was strange about picking up a young woman alone on Route 12 in the middle of the night? Daniel pressed, his tone sharper now. The man looked sheepish. I don't know, I figured she just needed a ride. People hitch rides all the time. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. This wasn't helping. Turning back to the girl, he tried a different approach. Listen, we're here to help you. If someone hurt you, or if you're in danger, we can protect you. But you have to give us something to go on. Her lips parted again, but instead of speaking, she simply stared at him with those hollow eyes. It was maddening, not knowing who she was, why she was here, or what had happened to her. Daniel felt a pang of guilt. What if she really was Emily Carter? What if she'd been through something unimaginable? One of the officers suggested bringing her to the station for further questioning. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. As they guided her into the patrol car, he noticed how she flinched at every touch, recoiling as though expecting pain. Whatever secrets she carried, they weren't going to come easily. On the drive to the station, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of something far bigger and far darker than anyone could have anticipated. At the station, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Officers moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by the tiled floor. The girl sat in a small interview room, her frail frame dwarfed by the cold metal chair she perched on. She hadn't said another word since arriving, and her silence hung heavily in the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. Daniel stood outside the room, watching her through the one-way mirror. His mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that this case was connected to Emily Carter, the girl who had vanished 5 years ago without a trace. Her face had been plastered across news outlets for months, her family pleading for answers that never came. Could this be her, or was it someone else entirely? Taking a deep breath, Daniel entered the room, pulling up a chair across from her. "We're here to help you," he began gently, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. "But we need your help too. Can you tell me your name?" She stared at him blankly, her dark eyes unblinking. For a moment, Daniel thought she might finally speak. Instead, she lowered her gaze to the table, tracing an invisible pattern with her fingertip. It was as if she were deliberately avoiding his questions, or unable to answer them. Frustration bubbled beneath Daniel's calm exterior, but he forced himself to stay patient. Leaning forward slightly, he tried again. "Do you remember where you came from before getting into the taxi? Did someone bring you to that gas station?" Still, nothing, no nod, no shake of the head, just that same eerie stillness as though she were trapped in a world of her own making. Daniel glanced at the other officer in the room, who gave him a sympathetic look. They both knew they weren't going to get anywhere like this, not tonight, anyway. Deciding to shift tactics, Daniel stepped out of the room and headed to his desk. If she wouldn't or couldn't talk, then maybe technology could fill in the gaps. Pulling up old case files on his computer, he scrolled through photos and reports related to Emily Carter's disappearance. There were pictures of her smiling at school events, candid shots of her playing with friends, and heart-wrenching images of her devastated parents holding candles during vigils. As Daniel studied those photos, something clicked. The resemblance between Emily and the girl in the interview room was undeniable. But there was one glaring problem. Emily had disappeared at 14. This girl looked closer to 18 or 19 now. Years had passed, years when no one had seen or heard from her. How could she have aged so naturally if she'd been missing all this time? Determined to find answers, Daniel ran her fingerprints through the system. While waiting for results, he dug deeper into cases involving missing persons in the area. To his shock, another file caught his eye, a woman named Sarah Monroe, who had gone missing 2 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Like Emily, Sarah had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions. When the fingerprint analysis came back, Daniel's stomach dropped. The prints didn't match Emily Carter, but they did match Sarah Monroe. A wave of confusion washed over him. How could this girl resemble Emily so closely yet belong to someone else entirely? And why did both disappearances seem tied to the same stretch of road where the taxi had been stopped? The pieces didn't fit together neatly. Instead, they formed a puzzle with jagged edges, hinting at a larger, darker picture lurking just out of reach. Daniel knew one thing for certain. Whoever or whatever this girl was, she held the key to unraveling a mystery far bigger than anyone had imagined. The revelation that the girl's fingerprints matched Sarah Monroe, not Emily Carter, sent Daniel spiraling into a whirlpool of questions. How could this be possible? The resemblance to Emily was uncanny, almost too perfect to dismiss as coincidence. Yet the evidence pointed clearly to Sarah, a woman who had disappeared 2 years ago under circumstances just as baffling as Emily's case. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen displaying Sarah's file. Her photo showed a young woman with dark hair and pale skin, but there were subtle differences between her appearance and the girl sitting silently in the interview room. Sarah's face in the picture was fuller, her expression confident and alive. The girl they had found seemed hollowed out, like a shadow of her former self. Something wasn't adding up. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel decided to dig deeper. He pulled up both cases side by side on his computer, Emily Carter and Sarah Monroe, and began comparing details. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. Both women had vanished near Route 12, a desolate stretch of road surrounded by dense woods and abandoned structures. Witnesses from both cases reported seeing strange vehicles or hearing unusual noises around the time of their disappearances. And most disturbingly, neither body had ever been found. As Daniel pieced together these connections, he couldn't ignore the eerie pattern forming before his eyes. This wasn't random chance. It was deliberate. Someone was targeting specific people, luring them to that remote area and making them vanish without a trace. But why? And how had Sarah ended up looking so much like Emily? His thoughts were interrupted when one of the officers approached him. "She's still not talking," the officer said quietly. "We've tried everything, offering water, asking simple questions, but she won't respond. She just sits there staring at the wall." Daniel nodded grimly. Whatever trauma Sarah had endured, it had left her unable or unwilling to communicate. Or perhaps she wasn't entirely human anymore. The thought crept into his mind unbidden, sending a shiver down his spine. Was it possible someone had tampered with her? Altered her somehow? It sounded absurd, but given the bizarre nature of this case, nothing seemed impossible. To test his theory, Daniel requested medical personnel to examine Sarah discreetly. If something unnatural had been done to her, cosmetic alterations, prosthetics, or even some form of psychological conditioning, he needed proof. While waiting for the results, he revisited the locations linked to both disappearances, hoping to find physical evidence that might shed light on what was happening. At the old gas station where the taxi driver claimed to have picked her up, Daniel scoured the area meticulously. The building was decrepit, its windows boarded up and its sign long faded. But something caught his eye near the edge of the property, a small wooden box half buried in the dirt. Inside, he found fragments of photographs torn into pieces too precise to be accidental. One shard showed part of Emily's face, another revealed a glimpse of Sarah's smile. Mixed among the scraps were cryptic symbols carved into scraps of paper, symbols that looked ancient and unfamiliar. Back at the station, the medical team confirmed Daniel's worst fears. Sarah's body bore signs of extensive modifications. Her facial structure had been altered surgically to mimic Emily's features, and her skin showed faint scars from procedures meant to erase her original identity. Whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to make her look like someone else, an act so monstrous it defied comprehension. As Daniel stared at the report, dread settled heavily in his chest. This wasn't just about missing persons anymore. It was about obsession, manipulation, and control. Someone out there was playing God, reshaping lives and bodies for reasons Daniel couldn't yet fathom, and Sarah wasn't the only victim. There were others hidden in plain sight, waiting to be found, but finding them would mean confronting the person behind all of this. And Daniel knew that whoever it was wouldn't stop until every loose end was tied up, including anyone who got too close to the truth. Daniel's investigation took a darker turn as he pieced together the fragments of the puzzle. The symbols found near the gas station gnawed at him. They weren't random. They were deliberate, like breadcrumbs left behind by someone who wanted to be followed but never caught. Armed with this unsettling clue, Daniel decided to trace the path where Emily and Sarah had last been seen alive. His first stop was an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place locals avoided due to its eerie reputation. Overgrown weeds swallowed the driveway and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. As Daniel stepped inside, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Dust blanketed every surface, and faint scents of decay lingered in the corners. It was clear no one had lived here for years, but someone had visited recently. In one room, he discovered something that made his blood run cold, a collection of lifelike sculptures scattered across the space. Each figure was crafted with painstaking detail, their faces eerily human. Among them, Daniel froze when he spotted two statues that looked strikingly similar to Emily and Sarah. One bore Emily's youthful smile, while the other mirrored Sarah's haunting gaze. They weren't just representations, they were perfect replicas down to the smallest freckle or scar. A chill ran down Daniel's spine as realization dawned. These weren't ordinary sculptures. They were memorials, or trophies, of the missing women. Whoever created them wasn't merely obsessed with appearance. They were fixated on recreating people entirely, capturing not just their likeness but perhaps even pieces of their essence. The thought sent shivers through him. Was Sarah Monroe real flesh and blood, or was she part of some twisted art project brought to life? As he explored further, Daniel uncovered tools and materials used for sculpting. Clay molds, scalpels, synthetic skin-like substances, and jars labeled with names he didn't recognize. In the corner of the room lay sketches detailing facial structures, body proportions, and notes about aging techniques. It was clear the artist had studied anatomy extensively, mastering the craft of replicating human features with chilling accuracy. But then came the most disturbing discovery. A journal, tucked under a pile of papers. Its pages were filled with obsessive entries, detailing plans to recreate individuals who had once been lost. Phrases like perfect restoration and eternal memory jumped off the page, hinting at a warped motive behind the disappearances. The writer believed they were preserving lives, not ending them, by turning victims into immortal works of art. Daniel's hands trembled as he flipped through the journal. One entry mentioned acquiring subjects from Route 12, describing it as a quiet gateway where people could vanish without notice. Another referenced using taxis as decoys to transport victims unnoticed. This wasn't the work of a random criminal. It was the calculated plan of someone methodical, patient, and deeply disturbed. The deeper Daniel delved into the farmhouse, the more convinced he became that the mastermind was still out there, watching. Every clue pointed to a person, hiding in plain sight within the community. Someone skilled enough to blend in yet sinister enough to orchestrate these abductions over years. Back at the station, Daniel shared his findings with his team, urging them to prioritize identifying any local artists or craftsmen with expertise in realistic sculptures. He also requested surveillance footage from nearby areas, hoping to catch glimpses of suspicious activity. But as he worked tirelessly, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If this person knew he was onto them, they might accelerate their plans, or worse, silence anyone who got too close. The case was far from solved, but one thing was certain. Daniel was staring into the abyss of a mind capable of unimaginable horrors. And the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place when Daniel received a tip from an anonymous caller. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. Look closer at the art gallery downtown. Though vague, it was enough to send Daniel rushing to the location, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The gallery was small and unassuming, tucked between a cafe and a bookstore. Inside, paintings and sculptures adorned the walls, and pedestals, each piece exuding a haunting beauty. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until Daniel noticed a series of lifelike busts displayed prominently near the center of the room. They were strikingly detailed, almost unnervingly so, and then he saw it. One sculpture bore an uncanny resemblance to Emily Carter, frozen in time with a serene smile etched onto her face. As Daniel examined the artwork, a man approached him, a middle-aged artist named Victor Lang, whose name had surfaced during earlier investigations. Victor introduced himself warmly, explaining that he specialized in hyper-realistic sculptures inspired by memories and emotions. His words carried an unsettling undertone, as though he viewed his creations not as mere art but as vessels for something deeper. Daniel's instinct screamed at him. There was something off about Victor, his calm demeanor, his meticulous choice of words, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long on Daniel's badge. Deciding to test him, Daniel casually mentioned Emily's disappearance. Victor's reaction was subtle but telling. His smile faltered briefly before returning with practiced ease. "I remember hearing about that case," Victor said, his tone measured. "Such a tragedy. I often draw inspiration from stories like hers. It reminds me how fleeting life can be." The comment sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He excused himself, stepping outside to call for backup while keeping a close eye on the gallery entrance. As officers arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the premises. In Victor's private studio upstairs, they uncovered evidence that sealed his fate. Molds shaped to match Sarah Monroe's features, sketches detailing modifications made to recreate Emily's likeness, and journals filled with obsessive notes about restoring lost souls through art. Confronted with the evidence, Victor didn't deny his involvement. Instead, he spoke with a chilling detachment, claiming he had been saving these women from obscurity. To him, their disappearances weren't crimes, they were opportunities to immortalize them in perfect form. "They'll never fade now," he said softly, his voice tinged with pride. "I've given them eternity." Sarah, who turned out to be a meticulously crafted replica of the real Sarah Monroe, was discovered locked away in Victor's basement, kept alive, but barely coherent. Her condition was heartbreaking, a testament to the psychological torment she had endured. She wasn't the only victim. Traces of others were found in various stages of transformation, some incomplete, others reduced to sculptures. Victor was arrested, his twisted legacy exposed for all to see. But Daniel couldn't shake the weight of what he'd uncovered. This wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about confronting the darkest corners of human obsession. Families finally learned the truth about their loved ones, though closure came at a devastating cost. In the weeks that followed, Daniel vowed to remain vigilant, knowing there were still mysteries waiting to be unraveled. For every answer he found, new questions emerged, and somewhere out there shadows lurked, ready to challenge justice once again.